What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Ransom Reviews, the first video of 2021, which looks to be just as bad as last year. I read about 72 books in 2020, and similar to 2019, I like to do a best of for each genre that I read at the end of the year. It's going to be a little bit different this year than last year. Last year, I did a tier list, and it was okay, but I didn't love how sort of wishy-washy the process was. So what I wanted to do before I released my top 10 for each of the genres that I read, which I'm going to do this year, I wanted to explain how I actually come up with these lists and how and why I rate my books. So why do I rate my books? This probably is connected to me being an English teacher and all the rubrics that I make and all the students that I have asking me all the time, teacher, why'd you give me this grade? Teacher, why'd you give me this grade? Please explain exactly what number I got on this assignment. And that's sort of manifesting itself in the way that I read my books as well. So that's why I came up originally with my subjective rating system, SLIC, which was story, language, ideas, and characters on a 10-point scale. I came up with it because I didn't like just giving a book 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. It felt too generic, not specific enough, not enough information, not enough to differentiate the books. And so I came up with SLIC originally, but then after using it for a while, I wasn't completely happy with it because sometimes I felt like I really, really liked a book, but the score didn't come out as high as I wanted to with those 4 categories. So this past year, I added the category of enjoyment as well. So it went from SLIC to slice. And enjoyment, I rate on a double weighted scale. Because for me, that's the real reason why I read. I read because I enjoy reading. And it's the most important thing, more important than any of the other categories. And I've been quite happy with how it's worked out so far. There are still issues. For example, if you're reading a book that doesn't have characters or doesn't really have a story. For example, let's see. Yeah, it's up here on my shelf. Stephen King's On Writing. It's a beautiful book that he wrote about how to write. It has no story per se. It has no characters per se. So with a book like that, I think what I'll eventually end up doing is just leaving the story blank, leaving the characters blank, and then just grading it on a scale with the other categories. But normally for most books, that's how I rank them throughout the year. When I finish reading a book, I rate it for its story, its language, its ideas, its characters, and how much I enjoyed it on a 10-point scale for each category, double weight enjoyment, and then I divide it all by 6, and that gives the overall score. Why does that matter? Because these top 10 lists that I'm about to trot out for the new year, they all have the books ranked by how they scored. And I really, really like this process because at the end of the year or at the start of the year, like I'm doing now, I can go back and look at all the books that I read. I can look at the lists and I can see very cleanly what the overall score of each book was. So I don't have to think about it at the end of the year and say, what was the best book that I read this year? What was the 7th best book and why was it better than the 8th best book? I do find a lot of these lists to be quite arbitrary. Not that my ranking system, my rating system isn't arbitrary, but at least this way I have basically the data to fall back on to look at and say, this is why I've ranked these books in this order. So that is basically how I rate my books. It all came from rating books on Goodreads, which I use a lot, and I wasn't really happy with the 5-star system. It's just so vague, and I don't really agree with the qualifiers either. In fact, I have my own sort of idea of when I rate books on Goodreads, what that means. For example, my scale from 0 to 100, if a book scores an 85 or higher, or an 8.5 or higher, it's a 5-star book. And for me, 5 stars can range anywhere from very good or even just good to amazing. And then 4 stars is anywhere from 70 to 85 or 7.0 to 8.5. And that means it can go anywhere from okay to good. And then the 3 stars is 55 to 70 or 5.5 to 7.0. And that means that the book is anywhere from meh to okay. I'm on the fence about these books, whether or not they're even worth reading, which is much different than the Goodreads scale where 3.0 means like, yeah, it was good. I don't agree with that. It's not how I feel. And then 2.0 is like really bad. 2.0 is 4.2 stars is 4.0 to 5.5, 40 to 55. Are you still with me? I think I lost you when I went Bill James Book of Baseball on book reviews. But yeah, I mean, basically, this was to get me away from the fact that a lot of the books I was reading, I was giving 4 stars to. Oh, this book is 4 stars. This book is 4 stars. This book is 4 stars. Most books are 4 stars. What does that mean? How are they different? So I was trying to find a way to differentiate my books, and this is how I've done it. So just a heads up for those that are interested, this will help you when I'm doing my top 10 lists in the future, so that you can see how I ranked these books. You can see where the overall score came from. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I just wanted to walk you through the process of how I rate my books, why I rate my books. I know it's subjective. I got in an argument with my dad about this. He said, "Why do you put enjoyment in there? That's so subjective." And I said, "Dad, it's all subjective. Even language is a subjective category because most people would look at the classics, which I have some of over here somewhere. The classics are up here. And say, oh, yeah, Charles Dickens, Herman Melville. What else do I have? Ernest Hemingway. These guys, they have the best language, the best prose. And I don't agree with that. I find most of that writing to be stiff and just not that enjoyable. And that doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's not what I like to read. So for me, all of my categories are subjective, of course, as I look at books as an art form, and art is subjective. So that is how I rate my books, why I rate my books. And what I have coming up next is a top 10 list for the best science fiction books I read in 2020, a top 10 list for the best fantasy books I read in 2020, a top 10 list for the best fiction and literature books that I read in 2020, which I combined into one category, not because of the same thing, but because I don't read enough literature for it to get its own category. Sorry, Shakespeare. And a top 5 for nonfiction, because again, I don't read enough nonfiction either for it to get its own category. And the last one, for all my haters, top 10 worst books that I read in 2020. So I have all those lists coming up. They're already all mapped out. I just have to record the videos. So I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you can now look at my lists and see how those rankings came to be. Hope everyone is safe out there. Happy New Year's. Welcome to 2021 on Ransom Reviews. And let's see those top 10 videos coming up next. Cheers.